I'm 85 years old now, and when I say that, it carries more weight than I expected, not because of the number itself, but because of everything it represents. The decades of choices that seemed small at the time, the moments I ignored, and the consequences that quietly grew into a lifetime of regret. I remember sitting alone in my old study one evening, the kind of evening where the world outside feels distant, the house is quiet, and the ticking of the clock seems louder than usual. And for the first time, I felt the full weight of all the things I didn't do in my youth. It wasn't dramatic, not like a sudden loss or a sharp failure. It came quietly, slowly, a deep understanding that had been accumulating for decades, waiting for me to slow down enough to notice it. And in that stillness, I realized just how many years had passed without me truly paying attention to what mattered most. I thought I had time back then in my teens, that mistakes could always be corrected later, that opportunities could be postponed, and that love, friendship, and meaningful connections would wait patiently until I decided I was ready. But time doesn't wait, and it doesn't forgive postponement. I looked back at the small decisions I had made when I was young, the choices to avoid discomfort, to play it safe, to focus on things that felt important but weren't. And I felt a wave of regret that wasn't angry. It was quiet, heavy, and impossible to ignore, because it had taken a lifetime to grow. Some things I lost never had a chance to fully bloom because I didn't act, didn't speak up, didn't take the risks that mattered. And now the people, opportunities, and experiences that might have shaped my life differently exist only in memory, in what could have been that now feels permanent. The truth is, regret doesn't arrive with a single moment of disaster. It sneaks in over years, carried by small choices, postponed actions, and a belief that later will be better. And in that quiet evening I realized my later never came for many of the things I should have done. When I was young, I felt the absence of things that were supposed to be mine, friendships that faded, passions I never pursued, moments of courage I let pass. And it was a heaviness I hadn't expected. Because when you're young, consequences feel distant, and time feels like it stretches indefinitely, but it does not. And that night, as I sat there, I understood something essential. The decisions you make in your teens, even the ones that seem small or insignificant, shape the entirety of the life you will one day look back on. And every moment you delay, every choice you avoid, carries a cost that compounds quietly but permanently. When I was a teenager, I believed the world was patient, that time stretched endlessly ahead of me, and that mistakes could always be corrected later. So I made choices with confidence that nothing I delayed would ever truly matter, because I assumed life would always wait for me to catch up. I told myself that popularity, success, and comfort were what mattered, that emotional risks were dangerous and unnecessary, and that the right time would eventually arrive to speak my mind, to pursue my dreams, to take chances. So I could afford to wait while I built my sense of security and control. I believed that avoidance was responsible, that postponing difficult conversations, delaying action, and hiding my feelings were practical strategies for growing up, because adulthood was something to prepare for cautiously, and youth was simply a time to survive without causing problems or making irreversible mistakes. I thought failure was something to fear, that rejection or embarrassment would mark me permanently, and that taking risks too early would close doors rather than open them. So I chose the safe path, convinced that patience was equivalent to wisdom, and that waiting would protect me from regret. I assumed that people and opportunities would always be there when I was ready, that friendships could pause and resume without damage, that feelings of love, admiration, or connection could be postponed without consequence, and that delaying the things that mattered most would never create permanent distance. I believed in preparation over participation, seeing the accumulation of knowledge, habits, and accomplishments as more important than engaging fully with experiences. because I thought adulthood would reward those who built quietly and waited, and that life would eventually provide a second chance to make the moments I missed worthwhile. I measured my worth in achievements, in skills and quiet discipline, thinking that the effort itself was enough to secure the life I wanted, and that the people and experiences I didn't prioritize now would simply adjust themselves to fit into my life later, whenever I finally had the time. I didn't see that life moves forward independently of intention, that the people, opportunities, and moments I assumed would wait were quietly moving on without me, and that the belief in later can become the most dangerous illusion, because it hides the reality that some doors, once closed, never reopen. I assumed responsibility was external and measurable, that work, grades, or appearances defined my contribution, rather than presence, engagement, and courage, and in believing that, I missed countless small but vital chances to be fully alive in the only moment I truly had, when I was living. And so my early belief that time was infinite, that opportunity would pause politely until I was ready, and that waiting was a form of wisdom, became the very framework that allowed regret to accumulate unnoticed, shaping decades of life without me ever realizing how deeply it would matter in the years to come. It never felt like I was making life-altering decisions when I was young, because each choice seemed small and inconsequential at the time, like skipping a social event, not sharing my feelings, avoiding risk, or telling myself I would do it tomorrow, and that's how regret quietly accumulated unnoticed. Each day offered countless tiny opportunities to act differently, to take a chance, to speak up, or to connect. And each day I postponed, convinced that my later self would handle it, and that the cost of delay was invisible because life seemed so long and mistakes felt reversible. I prioritized comfort over courage, routine over exploration, and safety over growth, believing that avoiding discomfort would protect me, when in truth, those small decisions shaped patterns that would limit my experiences, restrict my relationships, and quietly close doors I didn't even notice until decades later. One avoided moments that felt awkward or difficult, skipped invitations, said not now far too often, and chose convenience over authenticity, all while assuming that these small absences wouldn't matter, that the people I cared about and the experiences I wanted would wait patiently until I felt ready to engage. I didn't realize that habits compound slowly, that postponement becomes a habit, and that repeated small choices create invisible walls, separating me from opportunities, friends, and moments of intimacy that were never meant to be paused indefinitely. And the damage only became clear much later, when those walls had hardened. Some of the choices seemed almost meaningless at the time: not calling a friend, not sharing a thought, not following a curiosity, not apologizing, not stepping forward, not taking a risk, each one tiny alone but together forming a current that carried me away from the life I might have lived. The repetition was deceptive because it felt normal, even responsible, each small act of avoidance reinforcing the pattern, convincing me that I was doing the right thing, and that being cautious, patient, or strategic would ultimately protect me rather than isolating me from the experiences and people that truly mattered. Over the years, the accumulation of these small choices created distance, not only from friends and family, but from myself, because living cautiously meant avoiding self-exploration, suppressing curiosity, and postponing the very actions that might have made me feel fully alive in the only years I could claim. By the time I recognized the pattern, it had already defined my life, shaping my relationships, opportunities, and sense of fulfillment, and it was painful to see that what seemed inconsequential in youth could carry such lasting influence over decades without ever feeling urgent in the moment. I didn't feel regret in the instant of each choice, only a sense of relief or safety, and that is what makes this accumulation so insidious. The small choices that seem harmless at the time can, over years, quietly determine the trajectory of your life, leaving you wondering where it all went wrong. Time moved quietly while I was young, slipping past in routines and distractions, and I barely noticed it because days blended into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. All while I assumed there would always be more moments to act, more chances to say what mattered, more opportunities to connect. I told myself that delaying decisions, waiting for the right time, and avoiding discomfort was harmless because life seemed endless and the future felt like a guarantee. But in reality, the years quietly accumulated, and each one carried consequences I didn't yet recognize, shaping a path I could not retrace. Moments that seemed trivial at the time, skipping a class, ignoring a friendship, staying home instead of pursuing a dream, quietly added up, and the passing of time disguised their importance, allowing regret to grow invisibly until it became a heavy presence decades later that I could no longer ignore. I assumed relationships would withstand absence, that opportunities would wait patiently, and that mistakes in youth were temporary, reversible, or inconsequential. And because I believed this, I didn't notice how quickly time eroded the foundation of connection, trust, and experience I might have built had I acted differently. Years accumulated through repetition and habit, each day feeling productive while simultaneously hollow, and I didn't recognize the pattern, because living inside it made the erosion almost imperceptible, until the gaps became too wide to ignore, and the future I had imagined existed only in memory, not reality. Time moved independently of my awareness, teaching me slowly that the consequences of delayed action are invisible until the moment you finally stop, pause, or slow down enough to notice what has been quietly lost, and by then the cost feels permanent, like a tide that has already receded. Opportunities slipped past while I was focused elsewhere, milestones arrived without me noticing, and friendships faded in subtle ways, all because I assumed the next day, the next week, the next year would allow me to catch up, to reconnect, to live fully. But later is never guaranteed in the way youth makes it feel. I became accustomed to postponing important things for convenience, comfort, or fear, believing that time was generous, infinite, and forgiving, and because of this, I failed to grasp how each delayed action, each avoided moment, quietly shaped the person I would eventually become, and the life I would reflect upon in old age. The passing of time is silent, relentless, and indifferent to intention, and what seems abundant in youth can vanish before you notice it, leaving only the weight of missed chances, unseen consequences, and the realization that some things, once gone, cannot be recovered, no matter how much you wish to turn back. When I finally became aware of it, the awareness itself was profound, because it revealed that life had moved on without me in subtle, cumulative ways, and that the things I assumed would always be available had quietly become unreachable, leaving only regret as a constant companion in the decades that followed. The moment of realization didn't come with drama, it came quietly in a pause, a stillness where all the distractions of youth and middle age finally faded, and I was left alone with the understanding of how the small choices I made in my teens had shaped my entire life. I remember sitting in a quiet room, surrounded by memories, and suddenly noticing that the people I once took for granted, the friendships, opportunities, and experiences, had moved on without me, not because of anger or betrayal, but because I had allowed absence to become habit, and opportunity to become distant. It was not a single event, not a shocking confrontation, but a slow, dawning awareness, like sunlight creeping through a window, revealing the pattern of decades, the accumulation of delayed actions and postponed decisions that had quietly determined who I would become and the life I would eventually live. I saw clearly that what I thought was patience had been inaction, that waiting for the perfect moment was avoidance, and that the people I assumed would always be there had adapted to my absence. learning to live without my presence in ways I hadn't imagined until that instant. The realization felt heavy, not sharp, a weight that settled calmly over me because I understood that time had done its work silently, and the outcomes of my early choices were now permanent, tangible, and undeniable, leaving me with clarity and a quiet ache that could not be soothed. I recognized that regret doesn't arrive as punishment, it arrives as awareness, and that awareness can be subtle, lingering in moments of reflection, in quiet rooms, and in the recognition that some chances, once missed, do not return, and that many of my lost opportunities belong to this category. I understood that my teens were a foundation, and the small choices I made then built walls and pathways that carried forward for decades, shaping relationships, experiences, and habits in ways I hadn't seen while I was living them. And that realization hit harder than any single failure ever could. There was no one to blame because these were my decisions, my fears, my patterns of avoidance, and acknowledging this truth meant facing the consequences without explanation or excuse, seeing clearly the ways in which I had limited myself and the life I might have had. I felt both sorrow and understanding because clarity brought with it the full picture. The years that could not be reclaimed, the doors that would never reopen, and the knowledge that life moves forward quietly, patiently, and indifferently, regardless of readiness or intention, leaving only the results of our choices behind. And in that moment I realized something I wish I had known decades earlier, that time, opportunity, and connection are fragile, and that the habits of delay, avoidance, and fear that seemed harmless in youth can quietly shape a lifetime, leaving a profound sense of loss that is impossible to ignore once fully recognized. The emotional consequence didn't hit suddenly, it unfolded quietly like a shadow, growing over every memory, every relationship, and every opportunity I had postponed, leaving me with a deep, persistent ache that I couldn't escape because it wasn't about loss in the moment but about years of absence and avoidance accumulating silently. I felt a mixture of sorrow and helplessness, recognizing that the friendships I neglected, the chances I ignored, and the feelings I never expressed in my teens had compounded over decades, creating a gap that could never fully be closed no matter how much I wanted to repair it now. Regret carried a quiet heaviness, settling into the spaces where life had once been vibrant, transforming what should have been ordinary joys into reminders of what I had allowed to slip away. While believing I had all the time in the world, I felt the loss in subtle ways, invitations I never received, conversations that ended before they began, experiences that were no longer shared, and moments that I could only observe from the outside. Knowing that my delay in youth had quietly removed me from them permanently. The weight of missed opportunities was profound because it wasn't just the loss of experiences, it was the realization that I had repeatedly chosen comfort, avoidance, and safety over connection, courage, and presence, and those choices had shaped a lifetime more than any single event could have. I noticed how deeply absence had affected my relationships, not through confrontation, but through distance, diminished trust, and the quiet evolution of others' lives without me. And that awareness carried a unique pain because it reflected not failure in the moment, but cumulative consequences of choices long ago. Even the achievements I had built over the years felt shadowed by this understanding because, while they brought recognition, comfort, or stability, they could not replace the intimacy, growth, and experiences that had been quietly lost through postponement and hesitation. I realized that emotional consequence isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it manifests as silence, as missed connection, as the slow fading of opportunities that could have shaped who you are. And once those moments pass, their absence becomes permanent, leaving a constant, quiet reminder of choices made too late. I felt a profound sense of urgency too late, a knowledge that if I could turn back, I would make different decisions, take greater risks, express my feelings, and pursue the moments I once thought I could safely delay. Because the emotional cost of delay had become impossible to ignore. And yet, the weight of this consequence wasn't merely personal, it extended outward, affecting others in ways I could never fully repair. Because the absence of action in youth shapes not only your own life, but the lives of everyone intertwined with yours, leaving echoes of regret that ripple across time. I don't tell this story to lecture, to criticize, or to instruct. I tell it to share the weight of experience, to let you understand that the choices you make in your teens, even the smallest ones, quietly shape the rest of your life in ways you cannot yet see. If you believe that later will always be there, that opportunities will wait patiently, or that relationships can survive endless postponement, know that this is the illusion I lived under, the belief that delayed action carries no cost, and I can assure you, the cost compounds over decades until it becomes undeniable. The danger isn't ambition, school, work, or hobbies. The danger is postponing presence, connection, courage, and expression for the sake of comfort, safety, or convenience. Because what seems small now, the words unspoken, the risk unattempted, the chance ignored, can become permanent absence later. I want you to understand that regret does not come as punishment, it comes as clarity, and clarity often arrives quietly, in still moments when you finally pause, reflect, and see how time has moved forward without you noticing, carrying opportunities and relationships away while you believed they would wait. The people, experiences, and opportunities you assume are infinite are not. They are fragile and fleeting, and the habit of delaying, avoiding, or waiting teaches them to exist without you, leaving a void that grows steadily, quietly, and often invisibly until it becomes impossible to reverse. I learned too late that courage, curiosity, and engagement matter more than perfection, preparation, or delay, because life rewards presence more than calculation, and relationships, memories, and personal growth depend on acting now, not later. Because later may arrive when it is already too late to change anything. You may think you have endless time, that mistakes can always be corrected, or that love, friendship, and opportunity are patient, but every day you delay, every chance you ignore, you allow the path of your life to be shaped by absence instead of action. And that is the cost I carry today. Pay attention to what matters, even when it's uncomfortable, inconvenient, or uncertain, because the small choices you make in youth ripple across decades, shaping who you become, the relationships you keep, and the memories you will eventually hold or forever lose, and no amount of time can undo them once past. I share this not to instill fear, but to give you awareness, the same awareness I wish I had in my teens, to show you that presence, courage, and engagement, however imperfect, are far more valuable than waiting for the perfect moment, because perfect moments rarely exist, and delayed action often comes with lifelong consequences. Remember this as you move forward. Act when it matters, speak when it matters, love when it matters, risk when it matters. And do not assume later will arrive, because the years will pass quietly, silently, and inevitably, and once they are gone, regret is all that remains.